One of the comments that makes me really angry is the comment typically produced not by a Russian troll, but by a person who does not know the history of Ukraine or the history of Russia. And a person will advise, no, this is not Russia to blame, it is the United States or it is Europe or someone else interfered, and that's why you have this war. It was totally provoked from outside. I'm a Ukrainian and I know our history well, and our history tells that we have more than 1,000 years of wars between Ukraine and Russia. And somehow it is always Russia that attacks us and Ukraine that always needs to protect its independence and sovereignty. My name is Anna, and I vlog daily from Ukraine since the start of the recent brutal Russian invasion. And as a Ukrainian, I know our history better, and there are two things that I would like to stress in this video. Number one, Russian war in Ukraine is not just a local conflict. It is not about territories. It is a war between the democratic and authoritarian worlds. And I do hope that the democratic one will win. Number two, Russian war is not something new for Ukraine. It was not provoked by NATO, the United States or Coca-Cola. It was provoked by Russian imperial character, and wars between Russia and Ukraine last for 1,000 years. Let's look back in our ancient history. Around Kiev in the Middle Ages, a very big country developed, known as Kiev Rus. And yes, this is the history of Ukraine, not Russia. With its development, many new principalities started to develop, and in centuries of feudal divide, some new states started shaping really far away from Kiev on its periphery in the land known as behind the forests, or actually in the swampy lands. These are first proto-Russian principalities like Ryazan, Moscovia and Suzdal. Being on periphery, at a certain moment in time, these principalities lost their connection with Kiev and even started attacking it. So we may say that it is in the early Middle Ages that Moscovia first attacked Kiev Rus. And one more important fact. A descendant of Kiev princes, Andrei Boголюбський, coming from this proto-Russian lands, once invaded Kiev, looted many of its monasteries and stole an icon of Saint Mary of Vyshgorod. It was an old icon important for Kiev Rus Christianity, and now it is stored in Russia. But it was looted from a temple close to Kiev. And many Ukrainian intellectuals say that after we win this war with Russia, we have to start reparations from the Middle Ages, not just from this recent war. And only when they return the icon of Mary of Vyshgorod, we can say, well, this is something. So we can say historically, officially, that Russia started looting Ukraine even before the Tatar-Mongol invasion. The 13th century was marked by lots of devastations and destructions caused in Europe by Mongol Hordes. And somehow Moscovian princes loved this hierarchical organization of the Horde and assimilated with their society pretty well. And lots of former Kiev Rus land, even though they paid some money, made some contributions, they always opposed the Horde. And Moscovian princes joined the Horde and started following their rules. And in one of his recent speeches, dictator Putin says we don't have to undermine the cultural heritage of the Golden Horde. An important fact to remember: Ukrainians, Lithuanians, and even Belarus people fought against Mongol Hordes, did not like their society and attitudes, and Muscovites decided to join them and share the love for robbing and looting and raping and killing. In Moscow, even in modern Moscow, you cannot become rich by creating or starting something or developing. It will be taken from you. The only aspect that they understand is looting and taking away. One of my subscribers beautifully described that, saying that in Russia you cannot become rich by being creative. And I think it's true, unfortunately. It is only by looting and stealing. Another important example from our history is Pereyaslav Agreement. This is a version of Budapest Memorandum signed long ago with Moscow Tsardom. Ukrainian hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky fought with Polish Commonwealth. There were some problems and he was looking for an ally while shaping a new Ukrainian state. And by mistake he decided to cooperate with Moscovia. He died, unable to control how the process goes, and Moscow Tsar continued rewriting Pereyaslav Agreement for more than 100 times, cutting and cutting Ukrainian freedom. Because of this, condemned by all Ukrainians, Pereyaslav Agreement, it was very glorified during Soviet times. Ukrainians lost their independent Ukrainian church that was actually the mother of Moscow Orthodoxy. And this is the time when first Ukrainian books, Ukrainian universities, Ukrainian laws are forbidden by Russian Empire. Another Ukrainian hetman, perhaps one of my favorite Ukrainians of all the time, because he is also the eternal enemy of Moscovia, decided to cooperate with the King of Sweden. They united their armies trying to defeat Tsar Peter the Great at the beginning of the 18th century. This is another signal that Ukraine was always pro-European, and we definitely share more with you guys in the European Union than we with Kremlin. I think now it's very obvious. Unfortunately, this campaign was unsuccessful and Tsar Peter started genocide in Ukraine. During one of his awful genocidal acts, so-called punishment, in Baturin, which was the capital of Ukrainian Hetmanate, thousands, hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed, women and children, in Baturin. That can be compared to Mariupol now, in 18th century Baturin, in 21st century Mariupol. What is worse, inherited from Mongol times, attitudes do not change too. In Baturin, same as in Mariupol, they promised if you go out, if you give up, if you're women or children, we will not kill you. But as soon as people actually get out, they are killed and tortured. So please, dear friends, never advise Ukrainians to negotiate with Russians. Our experience, taking into account centuries of coexistence next to this evil empire, proves just the contrary. We have to finish Russia, and this time forever. After genocide in Baturin, Russian Empire did everything to prevent Ukraine from its development and independence. And somewhere in the end of 19th century, Zaporizhia Cossacks were really in decline. And this is the moment when Catherine II, a very bloody Russian Tsaritsa, decides to forbid Zaporizhia siege, Cossack organization in general, and invites them to join the Black Sea Navy fleet or move to Kuban. You remember, this is a region that sometimes explodes now inside Russian Federation, and once it was very, very Ukrainian. When Cossacks ruled Ukraine, it was a very democratic, very modern and very dynamic state. We did not have serfdom. It only came to Ukraine with Russian occupation. And 19th century is one of the worst in modern Ukrainian history. Russia introduces serfdoms. Russia starts looting rich Ukrainian lands and also forbids language, culture, religion. It was even forbidden to use traditional Ukrainian names when baptizing children to prevent the development of Ukrainian culture. They did everything. There were hundreds of decrees forbidding publishing Ukrainian books or for Ukrainian schools not to operate. They did everything for centuries to destroy Ukraine as a country, but they always fail. If we were not that strong, we had hundreds of reasons to disappear, but here we are. Another important feature of my people that I am very proud of is that when we are suppressed, when we are under pressure, the best of us become visible and strong. This is the moment when Shevchenko, a great Ukrainian poet and philosopher, develops. This is the moment when the idea of new Ukrainian independent state arises, and it is developed until the end of Russian Empire. The moment when Ukrainian People's Republic is proclaimed. While Bolsheviks were busy killing each other and drinking like crazy in Moscow, Ukraine started shaping its independence. These were difficult and very poor years, as people suffered from civil wars, from the First World War, and the country traditionally did not have much strong support from the Allies. And with all that violence and brutality that is so common for Russian invaders, Bolsheviks occupied Ukraine. And we lost our independence. Once again, people who do not know much about Ukrainian history will say, well, it was not that bad in the USSR. Ukraine was one of the republics that founded the USSR. No, this is what Moscow propaganda taught you, but this does not mean it was the reality of Ukraine. Our history during USSR times is very tragic. There were lots of acts of genocide, including 3 artificial famines in the 20s, in the 40s, and the one that is recognized all over the world, 1932-1933, known as Holodomor. Also, Stalin's terror and execution of hundreds of thousands of talented, independent-thinking Ukrainians who might have been our elite, but they were killed just as today, by the very same Russians. Soviet Union is also a period of severe Russification, total disrespect of Ukrainian culture and language, inability to practice your traditions, period of total godless philosophy and bans on visiting church or practicing your old holidays. This is also a period of forced migration when people lost the connection to their land and their families, and this is a period when they tried to deny the existence of Ukraine as a separate identity and to create the so-called Homo Sovieticus. You'd be surprised to know that strong partisan movements against communist regime lasted in Ukraine until the end of 60s. Taking into account huge totalitarian machine and so many people who were from the special KGB sources, this is a huge success, and many armies of the world actually learn the experience of Ukrainian partisan movements. What is also important and difficult to comprehend even for me, in the end of 80s, for example in 1989, just a year or two before the collapse of the USSR, some of Ukrainian intellectuals were still executed for nationalism inside the prison USSR. The collapse of the USSR was the result of inability of the communist regime to stay together. But this is not the sign that Kremlin, Moscow lost their imperial needs. At the very beginning, after the collapse of the USSR, Russia was weak. But really soon it realized Russian Empire is impossible without its former republics. And this is the moment when Moscow tries to occupy Georgia, they attack Ukraine, and they threaten many other former republics of the USSR. In your conversations with those who doubt, you may say, a very simple example, why Russia is impossible without Ukraine. Russian Empire, Russian future is impossible without Ukraine. They need us desperately. But at the same time, Ukraine can live without Russia and will live without Russia better than with Russia. Do you know why? Because Russia cannot compete politically, economically, culturally. Russia cannot compete with the USA, with China, with the European Union. Honestly, Russia cannot compete with us. There is nothing to impress the world with in science, in technology. So the only way is to terrorize, threaten, and with the help of wars and conflicts, provoke others and demand what it needs, pretending that it is still a power when it is not. You'd be surprised to learn that Putin is actually at rule as a dictator in Russia longer than Stalin. But in Russia, there are always Putins, Stalins, or other. Unfortunately, I'm afraid there are millions of such people. So, the history of Russian attacks on Ukraine, brutal, irrational, and totally illegal, is not new, unfortunately. So never repeat an argument that this recent Russian invasion was provoked by something. The only thing it was provoked by is Russian imperial character. And it must be stopped, and serious reconstruction inside Russian Federation will happen sometime soon, I believe. In our modern history, Russia first attacked Ukraine in 2014. So we can say officially these are 10 years of Russian war in Ukraine, of new Russian war in Ukraine, and 2 years of full-scale invasion. Something that most of us did not believe is possible in the 21st century. But with Russia that still lives in the past, it is very possible. What is good that during these 2 years we've managed to break the plans of this dying empire and its dying dictator, and now Ukraine targets lots of military objects inside Russian Federation. Our dear allies, don't be afraid of that. Russia is weak and Russia must be defeated. Remember to subscribe if you're new to the channel. Thank you for buying me coffees and becoming my patrons and helping film videos like that. The world needs to know more about Ukraine to prevent other crimes of Russia before they even start. United we stand. Slava Ukraini!